Hello. I'm going to talk to you today about what you need to know about GMOs. I was supposed to make this talk at the North Carolina Tomato Growers Association's Winter Vegetable Conference and the 2016 Southeastern Apple Growers Meeting, but I was unable to attend. So I thought I would record it. My name is Keith Edmiston, and I'm a professor of crop science, and I'm the extension cotton specialist. And genetic engineering, or GMOs, have been used in cotton for almost 20 years now. So I've seen farmers adopt the technology, and I've seen some of the successes and failures they've had with it. But I'm not really going to talk to you about that today. I'm going to try to talk about these questions. What is a GMO? What do they do? And who benefits from them? And give you as many examples as I can from the fruit and vegetable industry. Now, what is a GMO? Well, first, I think it's important to think about the word GMO. It's not a scientific term. It's not a term you hear at scientific conferences. It wasn't a term scientists invented. It's really came from the media and probably activists. And it really, if you think about the term genetically modified organism, that can include a lot of things. As a matter of fact, if we look at some of the things that man's done over the last thousands of years, we've been manipulating the DNA in plants, and you could consider any of these a genetically modified organism because we've certainly modified the genetics using selection and crossbreeding or just traditional breeding um, for our purposes. So on the top left you see corn and teosinte. A teosinte is a precursor of corn, and you can see on that teosinte how small the ear was compared to that quarter. And those kernels, they ripen at different times and fall off, so it's hard to, you can't harvest the whole ear very easily. And the kernels have very hard seed coats, so they're not very digestible. They require a lot of grinding or mashing to help make them digestible. And you see modern corn there and how big the ear of corn is compared to a quarter, and the seed coat's much thinner and more digestible. And if you look at the top middle picture, that's carrots, and in the background you see the orange carrots we're familiar with, and probably many people think carrots have been orange forever, but they haven't. That happened in the 1700s. Wild carrots are white, and some are sort of blackish purple looking. Um, so that orange color that we think of because of the anthocyanins and being good for our eyes, being healthy for us, is not from the wild carrot. So that was selected. And then on the top right, you see a wild tomato versus a commercial tomato today. Very obvious difference there. On the bottom left, you see a wild banana versus a Cavendish type banana that we eat today. You can see all the seeds in the wild banana. And on the bottom right, in the middle, you see a wild apple and then commercial apples on the right. So certainly in all these cases, man has selected for and done some crossbreeding to create varieties that suit the purposes of man better. Probably nothing is more illustrates this better than the case of wild cabbage. Now, wild cabbage is the plant in the middle, and all these different vegetable crops are the same species. The man just selected wild cabbage and came up with all these different vegetable crops, and they are all Brassica oleracea, and they can cross with each other because they came from the same parent. So on the top left, you select man selected for buds and he came up with cabbage. And the top middle, he selected for leaves and developed kale. On the top right, he selected for stems and flowers and got broccoli. On the bottom left, you see Brussels sprouts, and that's due to selection for auxiliary buds. And then on the bottom, you see kohlrabi. selection for stems, and then on the bottom right you see where we man selected for flowers and came up with cauliflower. So what is a GMO? Certainly you can make the argument that all those things that we just talked about are genetically modified. Man has, through either selection or crossbreeding, changed the genetic makeup of the crops that we use today. So another term for this is recombinant DNA. So I think the way to look at GMOs today, and I'll refer to them often as GMO, even though I think that's a very broad and somewhat meaningless term. It's become the pretty standard for the public. Um, is that it's a way of recombining DNA without using sexual crossing. So we're using some other techniques besides breeding, just pure sexual crossbreeding or selection, pressure, to create new varieties that have new characteristics. Now, the one that's most of the type of this that's most commonly uh, referred to in the press and probably known the most by the everyday person is transgenic, and that's when you move a gene from one species to another, and these species are not closely related, so that probably it's very unlikely that would happen in nature. So, for example, you move a rice gene to a corn plant, okay, um, or from a bacteria to a soybean plant. Cisgenic is when you're moving genes within the same species or closely related species. So this is the type of gene movement. We're doing it with lab techniques without breeding, but you could accomplish the same thing with breeding. Um, and then subgenic is where you're just looking at the genome of a particular plant and identifying a gene you would like to edit or amplify or delete, silence. So you're not taking a gene from one plant to the other. You're really editing the genes of the plant you're working with. On the bottom there has some links to some of the newer technology, CRISPR, which is used in transgenic, cisgenic, and subgenic. That's a technique that can be used in all of those, and it's the newest technology being used. Um, and it's much more precise in terms of if you're going to move genes, where you're going to put it, than some of the older technologies are. One of the things you notice when you work in this field is that these technologies change very fast, and often you'll hear one complaint about a technology or an aspect of the technology, and sometimes it's archaic or it's not being used anymore. So, and then that other video is RNAi, and that's RNA interference, and that's a pretty good little video to show you give you an idea what that is. And I put that in there because that is what's been used to create the Arctic apple. And I know that probably there's some interest in apples here at this meeting. Um, so cisgenic, when you're moving something that you could do with sexual breeding, um, why do it? Why use genetic engineering or biotechnology to do it? Well, here's one reason why you might do it. And on the left there you're making a cross between parent A and parent B. And parent A is a low performing variety. Perhaps it's a wild type, not even maybe never been a commercial variety. It's low yielding, but it has a particular trait we want. In this case, I put disease resistance. So we cross it with an elite variety, an elite commercial variety. And you can see once we make that cross, we end up with 50% of the genes from the wild or the poor performing variety and 50% from the elite variety. So to move that one gene, we have moved likely a lot of undesirable traits into that cross. So what you have to do is go through many generations, or at least somewhere usually 4 to 6 generations of back crossing the progeny from that cross back to the elite variety to try to get rid of the some of the DNA you brought in from parent A or that low performing variety. And at every step you have to check to make sure that you're keeping the disease resistance you wanted as you go through that back crossing program. With genetic engineering, it's possible to go in and take that elite variety and just change one gene and not go through a lot of back crossing. Certainly, especially in a lot of earlier biotechnology, there's been back crossing involved, moving the gene of interest from one variety to another. But you can see the possibility here could save a lot of time. And think about this: if this was not a annual crop, on the left you're crossing a peach tree and a low performing peach tree with a elite variety, and think of how long it takes for the peach tree to reach sexual maturity to be able to do the back crossing that you'd have to do. It's particularly valuable in crops, perennial crops, and tree crops, things like that, or could be. So what's the difference in genetically modified organisms and a genetically engineered organism? So if we look at this, a conventional breeding hybrid on the second column there, there's lots and lots of examples of that in common foods that we've created, but just crossing, simple crossing between two closely related plants, usually of the same species. And the number of genes affected depends on the species, but it's a lot. It's 10,000 to 300,000. Now, mutation breeding, we don't hear about that a lot, but that is another form of conventional breeding, and that is where you use either radiation or a chemical to induce mutations. And then if you see a mutation you like, then you try to develop a variety from that. The problem is with that is you're using these carcinogenic compounds or radiation to create these mutations, and you may see a mutation you like, but you don't know how many other mutations you made in the genome of that plant. So there's really no way to assess the number of genes affected. It would be very difficult to do that. However, this mutation breeding is considered like conventional breeding. There's no regulations, there's no process of approval or safety involved with crops that are created with this method. And it has been a pretty common method to create new varieties. And some of the examples are bananas, pears, apples, rice, yams, and mints, and others. So in transgenics and cisgenics, you see there, transgenics, we have your examples are Roundup Ready corn or BT cotton. A lot of things you probably heard of in the media. You're only moving a few genes, so in reality, you have a better idea what you've done to the plant. You're moving one to a couple genes in most cases. You know exactly what those genes code for, what proteins they code for, so you can test those proteins to see. So you can test those proteins to see if they're causing, they could cause any toxicity problems or maybe an allergenicity problem. So have a better idea what's going on and what we've actually changed. In cisgenics, it's got on the slide coming soon. Well, that Arctic apple is an example, and that's very similar. You know what changes you've made to the DNA and what proteins that is going to affect. So what crops are available today? The big ones are corn, cotton, soybeans, sugar beet, and canola. Papaya, alfalfa, and summer squash are also available and have been commercialized. Genetic engineered varieties have. And then there's two new ones, the innate potato and the Arctic apple, and I'll talk a little bit about them in a minute. Now, I think it's important we realize that we hear a lot about Roundup Ready and BT and all that, but most people don't realize that over 90% of American cheese, or the cheese made in America, is produced with genetic engineering, and that's because they use genetically engineered microbes to create chymosin to to make the cheese with. And before we had that could make uh, genetically engineered chymosin, uh, this enzyme was uh, gotten from the stomachs of ruminant animals, mostly calves. And many medicines are made with genetic engineering. An example is insulin, which has been made for quite a while with genetic engineering. So, what is a GMO? What crops have a GMO trait? And what do these traits do? And what is the benefit of these traits? So, here's a list I made of GMO type traits that we could classify most of the genetically engineered crops into. Uh, Herbicide tolerance, and you've all probably heard of Roundup Ready. There's certainly other herbicide tolerant crops that have been developed with genetic engineering, and there are herbicide tolerant crops that have been developed with mutation breeding also. So herbicide tolerance is not unique to just genetic engineering. Insect tolerance, you've probably heard of BT corn or BT cotton, so the plant's producing a toxin that's fairly specific to certain pests. You have some crops that have been developed with improved nutrition. You have some that have been developed to be disease resistant, to be stress tolerant, uh, to have increased storage life. We'll have some examples of that, but certainly as we look at feeding the world, that's expected to be between 9 and 10 billion by 2050. One of the ways to help feed the world would be to decrease storage or spoilage losses. There are medicines that crops have been developed to produce various medicines. Industrial uses, crops have been developed to have certain um, maybe oils or to be more specifically suited to a certain industrial use like ethanol or paper making um, or other fuels. Toxin removal, so removing toxins from plants. Uh, Improve metabolism, change in metabolism to improve the efficiency of the plant. So I'm going to sort of concentrate here on three that I think of these categories that are most applicable to what we think we'll see in fruit and vegetables. Um, and on the top left is cassava. And that cassava has been developed to have higher levels of vitamin B6. So, and vitamin B6 is a problem. It's a deficiency, common deficiency in Africa. And the girl there in the middle is going blind from vitamin A deficiency. And about 500,000 people in the world go blind every year, and about half of those die within a year due to vitamin A deficiency. So this golden rice on the right, the top right, you see the white rice and the yellow rice. That's called golden rice. It's been developed using genetic engineering to produce beta carotene, which is what the body uses to make vitamin A. And so you could eat about 300 grams of that per day and satisfy your vitamin A needs. So certainly farmers, consumers, and the needy could possibly all benefit from that technology. High omega-3 oil crops. Certainly omega-3s are considered to be uh, a good thing to have in your diet, nutritious. Um, and This has been developed in soybeans and canola and camelina and possibly some other crops. Uh, But one of the things I think is really interesting here is that for salmon farming, they have salmon have high levels of omega-3. And that's one of the reasons that salmon is considered to be good for you. But salmon don't make their own omega-3. They accumulate it in their diet. So what we've done in the past is we've had to feed them a lot of ground up fish to maintain their omega-3 levels. So if we could use these soybeans or canola to make feed for the salmon, it would eliminate the need to cast all these nets to catch feeder fish for salmon farms. This is a tomato that was developed in England at a university lab, and they developed it to have high anthocyanin levels, which is a antioxidant. So it's been proposed that this would help prevent cancer. We could make purple tomatoes. Purple tomatoes have been made before using just conventional breeding, as you can see in that picture in the middle. But look at the bottom two that have been cut open. That black or purpleness is only skin deep. But if you look at the top right, the anthocyanins are distributed throughout the tomato with a genetic engineered version. So farmers, consumers, and the needy could benefit from this technology. High oleic uh, soybean oil. Of course, that's oleic oil is one of the reasons why olive oil is considered to be good for you, or better for you than other oils. And farmers, consumers, and the needy could benefit from this technology. We often hear in the concerns that genetically engineering might cause allergens. And actually, here's a case where they're using genetic engineering to remove allergens from peanuts, which would certainly benefit the consumers. And again, if you think about it, when you know what what genes you're putting in the plant, you know what proteins it codes for, you can have a better idea about allergens than possibly just you would if you crossed with wild type germplasm. This is cassava. Cassava produces cyanide, which of course is poisonous, and so if it's not cooked enough, there's cooking. If you cook it, you can get rid of the cyanogenic glycosides that cause the problem. The problem is that sometimes it's not cooked enough, and it's a problem, particularly in Africa where cassava is consumed a lot. So this cassava that doesn't have the toxin could benefit the consumers and the needy, and this same technique could be used to reduce or eliminate toxins in other food sources. And here's an example where they've done it with cottonseed to remove gossypol, which is an insecticide that cotton plants make. Now, before a while back, they had been able to remove gossypol, but they were only able to remove it from the entire plant. And when they did that, then you didn't have the insect control that the plant was getting from gossypol. So with genetic engineering, they were able to remove it from the seed and leave it in the leaves so that that would help control insects, but the seeds would not have any gossypol, so we could feed it to animals besides just ruminants. We could feed it to pigs and chickens and people. So this is not uncommon. Lots of plants make insecticides or compounds to kill insects. Nicotine and caffeine are examples. Uh, and I don't know how soon this might happen in the United States or if it will happen, but there's certainly the possibility. Here is brinjal, which is the same thing as eggplant, being grown in Pakistan. And on the right, you see the BT brinjal, so it's been genetically engineered to produce BT, which is a toxin for some of the worms that attack eggplant. And this BT stands for Bacillus thuringiensis. It's been around for a long time, since about 1900. It's been used as a pest for pest control since 1930s, and it's sold as an organic insecticide. So certainly the farmers and environment and the needy could benefit from this technology. And at some point we may see this technology or something similar in some of our vegetable and fruit crops in the United States. Disease resistance. Now, here's several examples of disease resistance that's been developed with genetic engineering, and I say decreased fungicide use and insecticide applications. That's because, particularly with viruses, but with other diseases too, but particularly with viruses, often the insects are spreading the disease. So one of the control mechanisms is to control the insect. So often, if we have disease resistance, we can decrease both fungicide applications and insecticide applications. On the top left is a picture of a papaya in Hawaii, and you see the trees on the left have a ring spot virus, which was decimating the papaya industry in Hawaii. And then the plants on the right side of that picture, the healthy ones, are genetically engineered, and it's called rainbow papaya, and it's engineered to be resistant to the ring spot virus. Then the left center picture on the top is you see the grapes that have died, look like they're dying, and then grapes that are resistant, and that's resistance to Pierce's disease in grapes. On the middle of the top, on the right middle top, you see two rows of beans. One is genetically engineered to be virus resistant, and this was developed in Brazil by public labs there. And then the picture on the far right is a picture of healthy potatoes and potatoes that are infected with late blight. And late blight is what caused the Irish potato famine. And it's still today is estimated to reduce yields by 20% worldwide. So if we look at the bottom picture here, what that could mean, who would benefit from it, from these type of technologies, is you see that on the left side of this bottom picture, there are I think 12 sprays in this growing season, and most of those sprays are for late blight or Phytophthora. And so if you grow on the right side there, you have the plants that are resistant to Phytophthora or late blight. You only needed two sprays that were there for controlling Alternaria. So a significant reduction in fungicide sprays. So the farmer and the environment and needy could benefit from all these technologies. This is genetically engineered tomatoes that are resistant to fusarium wilt and early blight. Certainly farmers, the environment, and the needy could benefit from this. This is plum pox virus, which is a problem with not only plums but other stone fruits like apricots and peaches. And this technology has been developed and is ready to be used whenever the public is willing to accept it, or the disease pressure is high enough to make it necessary or needed. A serious problem in Florida right now called citrus greening. And this is a virus that's spread by this psyllid you see on the bottom right picture. There's a little insect. So the way we try to control this disease is to spray to control the insect, and that may slow it down, but it doesn't stop the spread of the disease, and eventually you have to kill the trees, destroy the trees that are infected to try to keep it from spreading even farther. So this is a serious problem in Florida. It's the 2015 Florida orange crop was the lowest in 52 years. So several labs are working on genetically engineered resistance to this disease. One of them is using a spinach gene, Probably the earliest we'll see anything is in 2019. And this problem is not just in Florida. It's shown up now in California, and it's in other countries. In fact, I think it started in China. Um, Definitely farmers, the environment, and the needy could benefit from this. We, if we had this resistance, we wouldn't have to be spraying to control these psyllid bugs, and we could maybe save the orange industry in Florida. And so hopefully, if the consumers will accept that, that would benefit the consumers. And there's a lot of concern: will the consumers accept genetically engineered oranges and orange juice from those oranges? One of the areas that genetic engineering has a lot of promise is in clonally propagated crops, because it's very difficult to move genes around with a clonally propagated crop where you don't have sexual breeding as an option. So bananas have several diseases that not only threaten the Cavendish bananas that we know and love, but also in areas of Africa like Uganda, where some bananas are staples for carbohydrates for the population, have disease problems, in particular black sigatoka. And researchers in Uganda, government researchers, have developed a genetically engineered banana that's resistant to this black sigatoka, and they're waiting on approval before they can release it to growers. There's various activities going on for stress tolerance. On the top left, you see a rice that is salt tolerant. The plant on the right is salt tolerant, one on the left is not. Then in the middle on the top is flood tolerant rice. Now we all think about rice as can stand, it's grown in water. It should be able to stand a flood. Well, it can only stand so much water, and that's a common problem in Asia, is for you get excessive rains and flooding to kill the rice. Um, and then one I'm sort of interested in from a selfish point of view is this aluminum resistance, because we have acidic soils in North Carolina, and aluminum toxicity is certainly a problem for us, especially in the Piedmont and somewhat in the coastal plain too, where you have aluminum uh, toxicity that inhibits root development. And so you see the corn here on the left is on that top right picture, the corn, how healthy the corn is that's aluminum resistant versus the aluminum sensitive. And aluminum toxicity is a problem across much of the rainy subtropics and tropics. Like from areas from North Carolina and the subtropics to the tropical areas in Brazil and parts of Africa. And then here's a maize or corn that resists droughts. So certainly stress tolerance would be beneficial to farmers, could be beneficial to the environment and to the needy. So here's your non-browning apples and potatoes, the Arctic apple and the innate potato. And what they did there is they used this RNAi to silence a gene, so that there's no PPO enzyme being produced, so that, or very little of it, so that your apples don't turn brown once you cut them open. And the same thing with the potatoes. So that certainly would benefit the consumers and the needy. Another thing about the innate potato is it produces much less acrylamide. So acrylamides are carcinogen that are produced when you fry potatoes at high temperatures. So there's a health benefit there as well. So non-browning would make the apples and the potatoes more appealing, maybe, but they don't bruise like a normal apple or potato, so that would reduce storage losses. Um, it's very interesting that the Arctic apple was developed by a Canadian apple farmer, and I think At one time, he had like seven full-time employees, maybe 11 total employees. So a very small company. And he saw the market share for carrots really increase, especially after the little baby carrots came out. And he was watching apple consumption decrease, and he got to thinking about it and looked in some studies about, well, apples have a couple problems. One, they're fairly big, so particularly children, if you put a whole apple out in a snack situation or hors d'oeuvres or whatever, particularly most people won't want to pick a whole apple. If you slice them to get them to a size that people would want to pick up as a snack or an hors d'oeuvre, then they turn brown and people avoid them again. So that's where he got this idea. Improved metabolism. Corn is a C4 plant, so is sugar cane, and what that really means is it has a much more efficient photosynthetic mechanism. And that's one reason why corn can yield 200 bushels, but you're never going to have 200 bushel wheat or soybeans or rice. In fact, corn can yield more than 200 bushels. Um, is those other crops, soybeans, rice, most of the crops we grow are C3 plants. They have a less efficient photosynthetic pathway or metabolism. Uh, the C4 rice not only produces higher yields, more efficient in photosynthesis, it uses less water. So they're working on trying to make rice a C4, have C4 metabolism, and certainly that would boost yields and help farmers, help the environment by maybe reducing the amount of land we would need to dedicate to rice, and help the needy through increased yields. Now, similarly, other people are working on in putting in pathways to make corn fix nitrogen like soybeans do, or something like that. Now, these type of products are probably a long ways off. We won't see them anytime in the next few years, but it's interesting that they're at least possible with this kind of technology. And in fact, they have made some strides, and this was done at NC State, and it's pretty interesting. They use this plant called camelina. It's an oil crop, and they had two goals. One was to make the oil suitable for jet fuel, so they had to change the type of oils the plant was producing, and they were able to do that. Um, and they also they wanted to increase the yield. So what they did was, it's not quite making it a C4 plant, but they put some bypass mechanisms in genetically that reduce photorespiration losses, that's the main reason why C3 plants yield less than C4 plants, is because of the photorespiration. So real interesting stuff going on there. Certainly, probably most people are familiar with how hybrid corn increased yields tremendously. When you have two inbreds and you cross them and you get this hybrid vigor. Well, that's possible with corn because the male and female parts of the plant are separate, so it's easy to emasculate one inbred and force a cross. Well, it's very hard to do with most crops because most crops are basically self-pollinated and have very small flowers and are not easily emasculated, at least on a large scale. But what they've done is with genetic engineering is to be able to create an inbred that is male sterile, and then they can force the cross between two inbreds and make hybrids and get this hybrid vigor. And you can see in this chart here, this is canola. On the chart, you can see the hybrids in the blue line and the conventionals in the pink line, and that's yield. And over every nitrogen rate they have in this study, the hybrids out yielded the conventional. Um, and then on the right, you can see a picture of the hybrid canolas on the right and the conventional canolas on the left. So certainly farmers could benefit from this, and the needy could benefit from increased yields. Who benefits the most from crop biotech? You hear a lot of things in the media about, well, the only people that are benefiting from crop biotech are companies like Monsanto, or maybe farmers are benefiting some from it. But other people, I think, are benefiting, and it's important to try to look at who is benefiting, because certainly those companies are benefiting. Um, that's why they do it. But if you look at these people from developing countries, and when they're applying pesticides, they do not have the safety equipment we have. So anytime we can provide technology to them that reduces their reliance on pesticide, it makes the world safer for them. And there's actually been studies in China and India where the introduction of Bt cotton reduced the amount of poisoning, on-farm poisoning that was occurring very significantly. So if we look at yields, and this is a pretty big chart, so let's just look at the two numbers I have circled. And if we look at that 6, that's the average yield increase from these various technologies, genetic engineered technologies, uh, in developing countries. So a 6% yield increase. That's not real big. Probably if we lost that yield difference, nobody would starve or anything like that. But you look at developing countries, they're getting a 29% increase from this technology. Why do they get so much more of a yield increase? And I think that's primarily because they don't have the other options. If we uh, don't use genetic engineering and use a conventional crop, we have some pesticides, and we have good access to pesticides, and fairly safe pesticides, and safe equipment to apply the pesticides. The same is not true in developing countries. So, have the developed countries benefited? The yields only increased 6%. So, has there been a benefit for us um, in developed countries? And you can see here what insecticide use in corn has done since 1976. 1976 was way before biotechnology, and it had over 30 million pounds of active ingredient of insecticide used on corn. If we go to 2000, uh, when genetically engineered corn was starting to take off, uh, let's see, about a little over 10 million pounds, and then by 2010, another dramatic decrease in the amount of insecticide used on corn. Certainly, this helps the environment. It helps farmers. Um, not to have to apply as much insecticides. Certainly in developing countries, it helps the needy. And then with herbicide resistance, something like Roundup Ready or one of the other herbicide resistant crops has really helped our growers decrease their tillage. Use a lot more conservation tillage. In the Piedmont, no-till. In the coastal plains, some of it's no-till, some of it's strip-till, but it's reduced tillage. That reduces erosion. It increases the amount of carbon dioxide that's sequestered in the soil instead of being in the air as a greenhouse gas. It increases soil organic matter, which helps us when we have dry periods during the growing season. And we use less fuel because we reduce um, the trips through the field. Now, some of the concerns are for this herbicide resistance are weed resistance. And if you look at the bottom left chart, there's resistance for various classes of herbicides. And you can see that we really didn't have herbicide resistant crops until a little bit in 96, and then 97, 98 started getting bigger, or a higher proportion of the acreage. And you can see that a lot of this herbicide resistance we had happened before then. And that royal blue line close to glycines on the bottom right is the Roundup resistance that you hear about so much in the weed in the literature. Now, since genetic engineering has come out, we've started calling weeds resistant weeds super weeds. Well, before genetic engineering, we had resistant weeds. We didn't know to call them super weeds until the media told us that that's what they were. We just called them resistant weeds, and actually in agriculture, we still call them that. So I think it's interesting to look there before 1996 that we had about 13.1 new cases of herbicide resistance per year, and that after genetic engineering was introduced, the number of cases actually went down per year to 11.4. So is weed resistance good? No, it's not good. But the point is that it was happening before genetic engineering, and but it is something we need to pay attention to, particularly as new herbicide resistant technologies are brought online. That we do not want to overuse herbicides, because that's really what causes weed resistance, is not genetic engineering, it's the overuse of herbicides or insecticides, or for that matter antibiotics for people. um, I find it ironic that there are other forms of herbicide resistance, and in this particular in wheat and in corn and in rice, um, that have been developed that do not involve genetic engineering at all, and in many cases they involve mutation breeding, and nobody seems to be worried about these. You don't have to have any special FDA safety, food safety uh, concerns. They're grown in countries that don't allow genetically engineered crops, and they're created through mutation breeding. They present some of the same challenges, herbicide resistance. Uh, I'm not sure why they're looked at differently. There's been claims of skyrocketing herbicide use with genetic engineering, and in this case, you see the chart on the right, and that's in total pounds, in millions of pounds per year in corn, cotton, and soybeans. Now, what's sort of um, misleading about the slide is that's total pounds. It has nothing to. It's not for the whole country. So we look on the left. There's that chart again, showing the total pounds used. But if we look at the right and we adjust that for per acre, pounds per acre, for corn, cotton, and soybean, we see very little change during that time period. Um, so what happened to cause that sharp increase was an increase in acreage, not an increase in use per acre. And if you look at the same time period here's for wheat, which is not genetically engineered, it actually did increase on a pounds per acre basis. And we can look at individual crops. And corn, you see that red line, that overall we've decreased herbicides during roughly the same time period, whereas in soybeans we've increased it. Uh, what's interesting, I think, though, is to look at the blue line. What we've increased is glyphosate use and decreased the other herbicides used. And almost every one of those other herbicides is more toxic and probably has more environmental penalty than glyphosate does. So even though it's an increase, you might consider it environmentally a positive. So why are all these GMO traits aimed at increasing production rather than adding value and nutrition of foods or other health benefits? And I get this question a lot, and farmers. I think one of the reasons is farmers will pay for the technology, and at least for this first round of technology that came out, the companies were looking for. They need to make some kind of money off of this, investing in this technology. And at this point, it's not even clear will the consumers accept the technology, much less willing to pay for the technology. So will they willing to accept a tomato that has higher anthocyanin levels? And if they do accept it, will they pay a little extra for it? So those are the questions that we don't know. Um, and if you increase the nutritional benefits, that constitutes a material difference, and it would have to be labeled. So that's maybe another concern. So if we look at what people think about, and there are a lot of surveys out there about should GMOs be labeled, And if we look at the one, two, three, four, five, six, seven, eighth line down, I believe it is, mandatory labels on foods produced with genetic engineering. And 82% of the people said yes, they should be labeled. I think it's interesting to look at the line above that. Mandatory labels on foods containing DNA. Over 80% of the people think that that should be labeled. So that would be almost everything except for maybe oil. Um, so if you give consumers a more open-minded question, what other information that is currently not on the food package, if any, would you like to see there? In this poll, only 3% of them actually said that they wanted to know more if whether it was genetically modified or not. So I gave you some examples of some of the traits that are out there um, that do something other than just increasing production or not so farmer centric. They're more consumer centric. I think this apple is going to be really interesting to see how it's accepted because it'll probably have a lot to do with how much companies are willing to invest in consumer related uses of this technology. Um, and so you see the golden rice we talked about also, and you see the next to the golden rice, the peanut with reduced allergens. That top right is actually a potato that produces a cholera vaccine. In the bottom left, the high anthracene tomatoes, and in the middle, the high oleic soybeans, and then innate potatoes on the bottom that don't brown and have reduced acrylamide production. And that's version one of the innate potato. Uh, they have USDA approval for the same innate potato with another the late blight resistance also, and they think that they probably should have the FDA and EPA approval in time for the 2017 growing season. So it's going to be really interesting to see how the public responds to this one as well. Are GM foods necessarily more healthy? The European Commission put out this document, and they said the main conclusion to be drawn from efforts of more than 130 research projects covering a period of more than 25 years of research and involving more than 500 independent research groups is that biotechnology, in particular um, GMOs, are not per se more risky than conventional plant breeding technologies. So I think it's interesting to look at what some of the scientific societies have to say, and this is a list, and this is you can see the link there. This is a list of scientific societies and their statements on GMO, and these are all scientific societies that have made very similar statements to what I just read from you from the European Commission. And this one was from Europe. This one's from North America. So if we look at the Europe one, you see the French Academy of Sciences, um, the German National Academy of Sciences, the German Academy of Science and Engineering, in England, the Royal Society of London, uh, so various different societies there from the British Medical Association. And then in North America, you see the American Medical Association, the National Academy of Sciences. Um, so I think it's interesting to look at those if their viewpoints. Are GMO foods necessarily more healthy? Here's an example here where they've taken a cereal, and on there's two boxes that are side by side on the left. The left one is non-GMO and the right one is GMO. And you notice that the ingredients list on the non-GMO on the left is shorter than the one on the right. And that's because they had to leave out some of the vitamins because uh, genetic engineering is used to produce some of the vitamins that we add to foods. So I don't think, and I wouldn't believe anybody that told me that genetic engineering or GMOs or biotechnology is going to solve every problem that we have in agriculture. Uh, I do think it, so it's not a silver bullet, but I do think it has a lot of potential. And this quote here is from Raul Adamchak, and he manages the organic farm at University of California, Davis. First, think about how they fit into a sustainable agriculture. Do they reduce pesticide use? Do they reduce soil erosion? Do they reduce nitrates leaching into the soil? Do they increase yields? If so, that's an improvement to our agricultural system. So I think what he's saying there is it's very important to look at each different application and judge each application differently because they all have different things they bring to the table, either environmentally or farmer related or consumer related, and I think very unfortunate to make broad aspersions that the either that the technology is terrible or that it's going to solve all our problems. I think it's important to look at each application of it and make an independent judgment. It might be totally against one application of uh, biotechnology and totally for another. Um, so, as a plant, if you're involved in crop improvement or crop breeding, you have a lot of tools available to you to use. And the way I like to look at it is that genetic engineering, there's several tools within the umbrella of genetic engineering. It's sort of like socket sets in your toolbox. And, there's a lot of things you can do, but some things you really need a socket set to do. Try working on your car without a socket set. And there are different kind of sockets. You got your deep sockets, you got regular sockets. There's sockets with extensions, sockets with extensions that swivel to help you get to hard to get places. And so I think that's what we need to think about is that this is a tool, and we can have a debate about how to use this tool, what's the best way to use this tool, but it's a tool. So if you're interested in biotechnology and agriculture, this is our extension portal. The web address is agbiotech.ces.ncsu.edu. There's a lot of information there, and we'll try to post news on there and events that are happening. And then if you have a particular question about biotechnology and agriculture or GMOs, however you would like to put it, uh, just click on Ask an Expert there and we will try to get you an answer. I appreciate you listening and thank you